Story 1. I never thought in a million years I'd be posting this kind of thing. My whole life it's been one friend zone after another. There have been a few times where I've had a real meaningful connection with a girl, but most of the time something goes wrong, or it turns out they're a psycho. They'll talk about how they want romance, but freak out when you surprise them. And unfortunately, if you're like me and you struggle to understand people, or you're prone to taking statements at face value, that makes you a very vulnerable target. A lot of girls have used me in the past, exploiting me for money, free rides, and most of all, as an emotional shoulder to cry on. In my experience, most women love to play games, flirting with you one moment and then withdrawing the next. And by doing that, they can keep guys like me dangling for years because we're just too trusting. That's what makes Valerie different. She's never asked me for anything like that, and I know she's super smart. The way we communicate is so fun. She does such clever little things, like leaving me a note asking me to leave the apartment block door open so she doesn't have to find her keys in the dark. It'll just be a note pinned to my door, but it's her way of letting me know that she's thinking about me. Other times, she'll ask me to hold a door open while she walks past with her groceries. When I do, she'll look at me and smile in a way that makes it clear she likes me. But it's more than just attraction. We have a really deep connection. Sometimes she'll walk downstairs barefoot and I'll say, "Nice shoes," and she'll laugh. Over time, it's become our little in-joke. We've had this back and forth for nearly a year. I always try to catch her going up her stairs, and I come out and ask how she is, and she'll smile at me and laugh at my lame jokes, and it's just perfect. And I've needed it. I've been in a dark place for a long time. I came out of university and got a job working from home. And without any real reason to go outside, I pretty much just stopped. I played games and ate pizza. I've gone weeks without leaving my flat. It was like that for so long. I became scared of going outside or speaking to other people. And then one day she turned up, and unlike so many people I know, she went out of her way to be nice to me. Without those flirty moments, I think I might have gone all the way down a dark path. But now that she's moved in, well, I go outside and she'll be in the hallway, laundry basket tucked under her arm, just waiting to ask me questions about my day. And not just generic stuff either. She remembers things I talk about, and she asks how it's going. She'll ask about my work projects, or my hobbies, or if I'm excited about a new game she remembered me mentioning. It's incredible to have that kind of meaningful relationship. Honestly, no other girl in my entire life has made me feel cared for like that. That's why I need to keep her safe. I don't think she knows, but I managed to get into the CCTV for the building. The landlord asked me to help set up the internet in this place, and I got him to let me take care of the building's IT stuff in return for a rent reduction. Now I can check all the cameras throughout the public areas of the block. Well, it's really good I can do that, because lately I've had to intervene to keep Valerie safe. One guy followed her home from a night out, and I could see her lean into his ear and whisper something, telling him to leave. Poor girl was probably too scared to say it out loud. But then she trotted up the stairs, and he waited a moment and followed. The thought of how he would have hurt her, it makes me scared. Not for her, but for him. Because the things I would have done to him, he would be begging for his life. I don't think that guy can even imagine what this £350, almost 6 feet tall silverback would have done to him if he'd hurt one hair on Valerie's head. After he went upstairs, I went and buzzed her flat, over and over. It must have scared the guy away though, because when she answered, she said her place was empty. She was sweaty and her clothes were torn, but she told me she was just exercising. I couldn't give away the fact I'd been watching her, because it's important to seem aloof, and I don't want to come off as needy. But the guy never actually left her flat. I checked the cameras over and over to make sure he wasn't lying in wait. But no, he went up the stairs and never came back down. Thing is, there's no back door in this building. There's just one entrance. That can only mean one thing. He was so scared of me, he jumped out the window. That's exactly the kind of protection I can bring to Valerie. It's very important to me that I can keep her safe. Unfortunately, I'm worried about how a relationship is going to work if she makes it so hard to protect her. Because the big thing is that this incident wasn't a one-off. It keeps happening. I've taken to hanging around the front door when she goes out, so that when she comes back, I'm here waiting, ready to shoo any guy away. She always seems really icy and weird at the time, but whenever we meet afterwards, she's clearly appreciative because she's back to normal, smiling and asking how I am. I wonder, is it just fear that makes her seem annoyed when she comes home and finds me waiting? I can't help but wonder what she thinks is happening when she lets these guys follow her home. She's putting herself at risk. Thank God I'm there to intimidate them, because none of them ever come back out the front door. They must walk straight up the stairs to her place and jump right out of the window just to avoid passing me again. That's a pretty crazy thing to do, considering it's not the ground floor. I will say, Valerie is young, and I'd like to think as she grows up, she'll become a more sensible young woman. But that's not the only red flag for me. There are others. For one, there's hygiene. Valerie always looks incredible, and she smells great. But the few times I've got a whiff of her flat, it's been... I don't want to come off as alarmist. It's just, it smells awful. Like eye-watering, skin blistering, paint peeling awful. Like my dad used to say, that smells worse than dumpster outside of a zoo in the middle of August. And the smell coming out of Valerie's apartment fits that saying perfectly. I mean, it's really hard to maintain this image of a precious little princess when you know she lives in a place that smells like a butcher shop. I tried to get a glimpse of her flat when she answered her door that one time, but it was all dark. Again, I know she isn't perfect. I just didn't expect one of her little quirks to be so gross. I don't even know what's making the smell, but I know the guy above her made a bunch of complaints via snarky post-it notes, but he stopped recently. At first I totally blamed him. How dare he say something mean about my girl? But now the smell is starting to seep downstairs. I'm pretty grotty myself, but sometimes I smell it and it's just like, Jesus, she lives in that? I'm concerned for her health if she doesn't get out of that unhygienic place. It's too embarrassing for me to approach her about it, so a while back I figured maybe I'd try to speak to the guy upstairs and get him to file a real complaint with the landlord. I knocked for like 10 minutes and didn't get an answer. Thankfully, I'm super close with the landlord, and a while back he gave me a master key because I needed to get into various crawl spaces between floors to lay Ethernet cables down. Long story short, I made a copy before I returned it to him. I swore I'd only use it in case of emergencies, but I figured maybe it was an emergency, and if anyone asked, I'd just say the door was open. I didn't expect the smell to be so bad. It wafted out when I pushed the door open, and it was almost as bad as Valerie's place. The apartment beyond was dark and humid and crazy hot. The old guy had pumped the central heating up to maximum, and the effect was like walking into Jumanji. I called out his name, but no one answered, so I started exploring. It was the usual old guy place. Newspapers were everywhere, magazines piled up high. For some reason he had a radio he still used, and a bunch of microwave meals. I did see some pictures of him with his late wife, and whoa, she was not a looker. I couldn't imagine how some men settle for women who look like that. He actually looked happy in his wedding photos. How sad is that? Anyway, I went through his apartment, but couldn't find the old guy. I did, however, find the source of the smell, and clearly there must be some kind of infestation. I don't know if there are cockroaches or wasps or some other crazy exotic pet that got loose in the building, because something has piled up a bunch of rubbish in the bathtub and started making some kind of hornet's nest out of it. It was about chest high and shaped like a weird bubbling island that jutted out of the water the colour of blood and oil. The hive itself was made of rotting meat, chewed up paper, discarded fruit, all kinds of random stuff. Hell, there was even the old man's robe in there, and that guy never took that thing off. Looking around a bit more, I saw that the fridge door was wide open and it was completely empty. So the old guy must have taken all his food and put it in the bath. Weird, right? Either way, the nest looked completely emptied. Whatever had made it was long gone now, so I decided to give it a little poke. It felt like rotten wood beneath my finger, but it was somehow greasy. It left a residue on my finger the colour of bolognese grease, and it stank for days. I sniffed my finger and started gagging when out of nowhere, this groan came from the hive, and it moved, just a little bit. It sounded an awful lot like someone saying help, but it was so muffled and I was so scared. I didn't really get a chance to think about it because I was running for my life. Looking back, I'm 99% sure I heard it wrong, but there was no denying that whatever was in that hive sounded an awful lot like a person. I've tried Googling to see if I could find out what that thing was, but I couldn't find anything useful. Whenever I search bugs that sound like people, it just shows me a bunch of kids' films. There must be something in nature that makes that noise, because sometimes when Valerie goes out, I sneak up to her door and press my ear close to it, and I hear the same thing. It's all weird and distorted, but it definitely sounds like the word help. The infestation has clearly spread, and whatever bug is responsible could be dangerous. I even dared to open her door once, just to see if I could glimpse how bad her apartment is. I literally just popped it open and looked. It was too dark to see anything, but she must have some kind of pet, because something came stumbling out of the dark towards me. It was like a person made of paper or rotting wood, with their back and face covered in little white bumps about the size of a pea. This thing covered the distance so quickly, even though its hands looked awkward and clumsy as it slapped them down on the floor to come towards me. When it opened its mouth, there was nothing but this swollen piece of meat that stopped any sound. It looked like raw steak, and it dripped grease the same colour as the bath. I cried out and slammed the door shut, but a second later something thumped against it. That's when I finally realised what was happening. I can't believe it didn't occur to me earlier, but Valerie must work in special effects. I felt like such an idiot as the thought sunk in. I always knew she was a creative. Women always are. Anyway, it suddenly made sense why there was that hive upstairs, and why Valerie was taking so much stuff out to the bins. It might even have explained the smell, although that doesn't necessarily make the hygiene aspect any better. I do worry that Valerie knows I opened her door, Earlier today, I saw her dragging something in a big thick bin bag down the stairs. I rushed out to help her and went to help, but she pulled it away and looked at me really angrily. She snapped at me, telling me to leave her alone. For a second I almost listened, but girls never really know what's best for them, so I went to take it anyway. Unfortunately, I just ended up ripping it. I expected Valerie to get really upset with me, maybe even cry. But both of our eyes were drawn when something plopped out of the sack that thudded its way down the stairs like a rotten cantaloupe. I ran down and looked at it, not knowing what it was at first. It looked like a bunch of unhardened papier-mâché, and it was very similar to that nest from the old man's place. When I reached down and picked it up, I saw it had hair and these empty eye sockets, and even a stump where the neck should be, and there were thousands of pock marks all across the face, like little dents or burrows. That's when I realised this was the prop I'd seen in her flat. I asked her, "Do you work in special effects? It must be I took a good look at the head. It didn't look very realistic at all. Everything was out of proportion and all bloated. "Is this a work in progress?" I asked politely. I don't know why, but I kind of muttered, "I'm sure you'll get better." I wanted to sound reassuring, but as soon as I said it, my heart dropped. I didn't want her to be upset at me. Thankfully, Valerie just kind of stopped, looked at me, and then laughed her ass off. If anything, I think she appreciated my honest criticism. Afterwards, she smiled this sort of cheeky, flirty smirk and asked me to help clean it up with her, so I did. It took hours for us to do it properly, but being knelt down together, scrubbing the floor, was the closest we'd ever been physically, and I liked it. Plus, I got to see just how creative she was, because there was all kinds of cool stuff in that bag, including mulched up feet, severed fingers, and these crazy wasps the size of my fist. None of the human stuff looked any good, but the bugs were amazingly detailed and so realistic. One fell out of the face's nose, and when I picked it up, Valerie looked so sad. I asked what was wrong with this decoration, pointing out just how realistic it was, and she said that sometimes the process just doesn't work out. I almost made a joke, but I could see just how bummed out she was about it. Personally, I couldn't see what was wrong with it. The feel of the wasp's hair, that long creepy stinger, and the way it plopped out of the guy's nose. It even had bits of gore in its mandibles. She'll be famous one day. But I also know what it's like to feel like a failure, no matter what. So I just put a hand on her shoulder and said, "It'll be okay." I think it paid off, because afterwards she asked if I wanted to come up to her place for coffee. One weird thing was that early on during the cleanup, she looked up at the camera for a long time, and her eyes narrowed, like she just realised something important. For a second, I wondered if she'd realised how I'd seen her struggling on the cameras. But aside from the weird look, she never mentioned it. And besides, during the cleanup she was super nice to me, asking me about my family, my parents, if I have any siblings or friends. And then finally, she asked if I wanted to come up. I could have squealed like a schoolgirl when she said that. Obviously I said yes. I am nervous though. What if she keeps doing risky things like letting men follow her? And what if she's a really bad homemaker? I've smelled her flat, and I'm not sure I want a woman who prioritises her career over basic domestic chores. I guess I'll just have to wait and see. Story 2. After the incident, my therapist urged me to keep a diary. The incident occurred last year, and long story short, involved me attempting to burn down the local Catholic church in the middle of the night. The fallout from that adventure was handled discreetly, as such things usually are when you have wealthy parents. But I didn't get off scot-free, and had to endure various forms of punishment. Chief among them, having to keep a goddamn diary. Kate, my therapist, who happened to be my father's chum, had said, "Your reluctance to talk about your feelings, I believe, is a large part of why you act out. And since you clearly have trust issues, perhaps we can kill two birds with one stone, as they say. And you can keep a journal where you talk to yourself about what happens every day and how you feel about it. Perhaps once you learn to trust yourself, you can start to trust others, and then you can talk to them about your feelings." All I ever wrote in that diary was a bunch of rubbish that I thought would make my parents, who snuck into my room every day to read the thing, satisfied enough to leave me alone. That's all I ever wrote in it, anyway, until the day I met Red, when I recorded that experience with breathless awe, with complete earnestness, and then hid the journal away where no one can find it. Before I share that first entry, I want to be absolutely clear that I wrote this account after I experienced the events it discusses. I clearly remember sitting in my bed, opening the drawer of my nightstand, withdrawing a pen in the diary, and writing the following. Sunday, October 18th. Dear Diary. Damn, Red. Where did he come from? Where has he been hiding my entire life? It doesn't matter. I found him, standing there in Heritage Park, in the most ridiculous outfit. Now that I think about it, he didn't have a scrap of red on him anywhere. Every other colour though, a patchwork of all the other colours of the rainbow, and many more besides, stitched together as by the world's most deranged grandmother. And his hair, long and thick and black, but no red. "My name's Red," he said, as I was walking past him on my way to the coffee shop. I hadn't paid him any mind yet, and at the time, he seemed just another desperate performer, same as anyone. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Get lost," I said. "That sounds Russian. Are you Russian, young lady?" he quipped. I stopped walking and turned to face him. He had deep blue eyes. "Nope," I said. "I'm American, through and through." "But you were Russian, weren't you? Off to the coffee shop, perhaps?" I suppose that's rather an American thing to do, always rushing around. It's perfectly consistent. It all makes perfect sense. I looked to the ground, where Red had placed the top hat upside down, which had $3 or $4 bills inside of it, along with some loose change. "All right, what's your deal then? You just stand here and do dad jokes?" "No, that's just how I draw them in. A little buffoonish humour." "So what do you do?" I asked, deciding that if he didn't give a good enough answer, I'd keep walking. "Many things, young lady, many things. But for you, I will show you things as they truly are, not as people pretend them to be. It's not a talent I use often, but something about you tells me you're ready to see through the facade. Am I right?" I supposed I was in for a cheap magic trick or something like that, but had to, sadly, admit to myself this was already the most interesting thing that had happened to me in several weeks. "Sure," I said. "Good. Now, look over yonder." Red swung his multicoloured arm out and pointed at a man jogging through the park. There was nothing unusual about the man. He was very fit and attractive, dressed in a tank top that barely contained his bulging muscles, and he was dripping with sweat, listening to music of some kind. Or maybe just an inspirational recording of his own voice saying, "You're an incredible specimen, nothing can stop you." In short, he made my stomach turn. But then, most people did that. "So?" I asked, turning back to Red. "Did you really look? Try again." I sighed with disappointment. I don't know what I thought would happen, but looked again at the jogging man. This time, he was quite different. Now he was simian, looking for all the world like a giant monkey, with a monkey face and monkey limbs. He was dressed in the same sort of absurd garb that Red was wearing, with tattered bits of blue and yellow and pink flapping around, as he moved along in a waddle, lifting each leg high and bringing it down somewhere off to the side, like a big awkward crab monkey clown. I laughed, partly out of shock and partly out of delight. "How did you do that?" I asked. "That man is your sidekick, no? And you had a monkey hiding in the bushes that he switched out when I wasn't looking." "Not at all, dear. The monkey is the man. I have, as promised, merely shown you things as they really are. Or rather, things as they are beneath the first layer. It's what you've always suspected, isn't it? That the world is full of people pretending to be something they're not. That, once you strip the pretense away, people are simply dumb monkeys waddling through life in a comically exaggerated fashion without any real purpose. You can sense that it's true, but the deceit is great enough to trick your very eyes. You see men and women dressed to the nines, approaching life with a deadly seriousness, and you begin to doubt yourself. Well, doubt yourself no more. You have seen the truth." An eerie feeling passed over me, and for a moment I believed what he said. But when I looked at the jogging man for the third time, he was only that, a man going on a late morning jog. "No, really, how did you do that? Would you like to see even deeper?" "Yes," I said, without hesitation. "Then come back tomorrow. Same place, same time." "I will," I said. Then I remembered that I had school. I was down to my final warning, and couldn't afford to miss another class. "Oh, damn, I can't. Will you be here later, in the afternoon?" "I will certainly try to be. For now, I must move on." Red bent down, scooped the money out of his hat, and stuffed it into an enormous pocket. I felt a sudden pang of guilt, as I didn't have any cash with which to reward this man for so thoroughly entertaining me. "I'm sorry," I said, "but I don't have any money on me, just a credit card. I'll bring some tomorrow, I promise." "Think nothing of it, young lady," said Red, flipping the hat through the air and catching it expertly on top of his head. "I do hope to see you tomorrow." Then he turned and waddled off through the park. I stood there for a long time, full of wonder, trying to figure out how he had done it. In the end, I decided it didn't matter and went ahead to the coffee shop. As I was waiting in line, I began to picture the people around me as clownish monkeys, the same as the jogging man in the park. I had to hold my hand over my mouth to keep from erupting in laughter. Now I'm here in bed, and I have not stopped thinking about Red all day. His magic trick was, quite possibly, the delight of my life. Certainly the best thing that's happened to me in years and years. A splash of colourful paint across a dull and dreary canvas of lifeless greys. I absolutely can't wait to see him again and discover what else he has in store for me. I truly doubt anything can top what he's already done, but we'll see. Meanwhile, I have no choice but to contain my excitement and wait until after school tomorrow. Unless I don't? I'll get in trouble, but what does it matter? It's a world full of monkey clowns. What's the worst they can do to me? Throw a pie in my face? And so I concluded my first real diary entry, hiding it inside of an old stuffed bear I found in the back of my closet. Then I settled into bed and tried to go to sleep. My excitement made that difficult, but I also felt a deep and easy peace I hadn't known for a long time. I had a friend, someone who understood the world as I understood it, and was delightfully entertaining as well. And so I finally sunk into sleep, and dreamt of a carnival deep in the wild primordial swamp, where reptiles crawled out of the murky depths and devoured mountains of cotton candy. The next morning, I woke up full of energy, having resolved to ditch class and meet Red at the park. I didn't want to miss him, and whatever wonderful trick he had in mind to show me. Predictably, my phone started to buzz a few minutes after I was off school grounds, so I switched it off and shoved it into my purse. Then I walked to the park, feeling light and free, despite the certain punishment I would face at the end of the day. Red was standing in the same place as before, but when I approached him, I saw he was sad. Now at last, he had some red to him, though it was where his eyes should have been white. He had obviously been crying. "What's wrong?" I asked when I was close enough. "Oh, sweetheart, I didn't expect to see you at this hour," he said, sniffling and wiping his nose with his colourful sleeve. "Catherine," I said. "My name is Catherine. Why are you crying?" "Catherine, a wonderful name." "Ah, forgive me, my dear. I was only lamenting the fact that I've been robbed. Every hard-earned penny gone. It wasn't much, but I came by it honestly. Or maybe I didn't. I forget. It doesn't matter one bit, though, now that you're here." I'd come prepared with 2 $100 bills, pilfered from my father's wallet. He wouldn't miss them. I dropped one into Red's hat. "This is for yesterday, and I've got another for today, assuming you have a new trick for me." "You're too kind, Catherine, too kind. I'll have to conjure up a good one. But I'll remind you, they're not tricks. Not tricks at all. I would never trick you, Catherine. The others, yes, of course. I'll dazzle them by pulling a rabbit out of nowhere, or making a ball jump unseen from cup to cup. Cheap illusions. But for you, only the truth. Only things as they really are. 1 minute now, hold on. Okay, here comes our jogger. Same one from yesterday. Are you ready?" "Yes." "Then look." I turned my head, expecting to be delighted again, but what I saw shocked me with its grotesqueness. The jogging man now appeared not as a comical monkey, but as someone long dead, with rotten flesh sloughing away from the bone, and feasted upon by swarms of squirming worms. This alone was enough to make me retch, but what sent my mind spinning to the edge of madness was the way the thing moved. It wasn't as if in the movies, when the dead come back to life, and lumber around awkwardly, with crude control over their bodies, but at least some control. And that certainly would have been terrifying enough. But the uncanny corpse that I saw now appeared to be moved by several pairs of invisible hands. One set lifting a limp leg in the air here, another giving a shove from behind there, a third holding the body up from under the arms, in order to prevent the entire show from collapsing. The effect was something truly and finally dead, and not somehow reanimated, moving around in the world of the living. "Catherine?" asked Red. "What's wrong? Are you not delighted?" I snapped around with a rush of anger crashing around a sense of implacable dread. "It's awful," I said. Red frowned. "My darling, you're going to make me cry again. I thought we shared an affinity for the truth." "That's not the truth," I spat, pointing behind me, but unwilling to look in that direction again. But it is, at a more fundamental level. These people you see all around you are nothing but worm food, temporarily controlled by unseen forces, being moved witlessly from point A to point B, until they grow too heavy and bloated to be moved around any longer, and the showrunners find fresher meat. I thought you would like to see this. Go away, I said, and I crumpled up the other $100 bill and threw it in his face. Then I walked away, keeping my eyes on the ground and trying not to break down. In my mind, I could still picture the dead jogger being forced to jog along as he decomposed into pure rot. At one point, I looked up to see Red bend down and pick up the wad of money. Damn fraud, I muttered, and went to bring my vision back down to my shoes. But along the way, I caught sight of another dead person. This one looked to be a woman, her clothes stained black and brown with her own fluids, jerking forward down a path in unnatural, floppy fits and starts. Then the stench hit me, and I surveyed the park head on, and saw that it was filled with the dead, going about their mindless business, dozens of them, heads bouncing on limp necks, from side to side or front to back, as they were shoved along by invisible hands. I ran home, as though myself being poked by some unseen prod, and when I swung the door open, I was greeted by my mother, though mercifully she did not appear dead. "Kate," she began, in a voice hung between anger and relief. I wrapped my arms around her and started to sob. "I'm so sorry," I wailed, "about the way I've acted, the way I've been, about everything." "Shush," said my mum. "Everything's going to be okay. Mummy's here. Mummy's here for you." After a long session with my mum, in which I kept details sparse, I headed up to my room. I was going to spill my guts out to my diary. Not just about the awful things that Red had shown me, but about all sorts of things that I now realised were true about myself. In the course of a few hours, I had suddenly shed years' worth of carefully constructed defence mechanisms. I went to the closet, felt around till I found my old teddy bear, and pulled the diary out. I took it over to my bed, where I propped up some pillows and settled in to write my epic confessional. I flipped through the pages of lies I'd felt so clever in creating, until I got to the previous day's entry. Sunday, the day I met Red. I cringed as I glanced over those words, and then hurriedly turned the page. It was already filled in. What the hell? I lifted the journal up to my face and squinted. It was my own handwriting, my own style too. "Dear Diary, today was screwed up." That was exactly how I intended to begin the entry. Absurdly, I turned my eyes to my right hand, as if I would find some kind of answer etched into my palm. I didn't, of course. There was just the usual pattern of creases and whorls. I stared at it for a long time, until it began to look strange, like an alien creature onto itself. Then I snapped out of it, took a deep breath, and read the rest of the entry. It described my day exactly, starting with the excitement I'd felt in seeing Red again, and ending with me coming up to my room to write it all down. When I'd finished reading, I closed the diary, got up, and replaced it in the teddy bear. I tried not to think about it. For the next 3 days, I was a model citizen. I grovelled at the principal's feet, in complete earnestness for another chance. I did all of my homework and ate all of my veggies. I refrained from making sarcastic remarks, and even from smoking. Seeing those corpses, jostled around by its invisible masters, had shaken me to my core. Suddenly, life seemed worthwhile to me, even if it meant doing all of the things that appeared ridiculous and pointless before. At the end of the third day of my reformed life, Thursday, I decided to revisit my diary. I had brushed aside the previous incident as a trick of my overstressed mind. I must have written that entry in a daze, and then, when I came back to myself, forgotten all about it. But there was no rationalising away what came next. I opened the journal and flipped to the last entry. It was for Friday, October the 23rd, which is to say, the future. It was again written in my own hand, in my own voice. It was a long, rambling chapter about how my father had had a heart attack. It was a non-fatal one, I wrote, but it still screwed me up. I'd visited him in the hospital during mealtime, and he had been eating a fruit cup. But he looked like all those people in the park, dead, crawling with worms, with some force lifting his dead hand and awkwardly shoving a spoonful of fruit into his mouth. The food fell out directly and slid down his chin in a river of various fluids that had poured out of him. I blinked, and he was alive again. I'd written at length about how I didn't want my dad to go away, and how I didn't want anybody to do that, and how scared I was. I read all of this in a state of shock, but even by the end of it, it was possible to explain away, if I tried hard enough. Red's cheap magic trick had simply gotten too deep in my brain. I was imagining things that hadn't happened, writing things about these imaginings, and then forgetting having written them. But when, on Friday, my father had a non-fatal heart attack, and I visited him in the hospital, where he appeared dead to me for a moment, like I said, there was no rationalising that away. My father returned home on Saturday, and despite him having just come within an inch of death, I do think he was in better shape than me. To put it mildly, I had a lot on my mind. There were the visions of corpses that Red had shown me, which haunted me at random moments throughout the day and in my dreams. And then there was my father's cardiac event, which just drove it home even deeper how fragile and precious everything was, despite the layers of gristle I'd piled up around my psyche to protect me from this realisation. Next, of course, there was the fact that my diary was somehow filling itself in a day ahead of time. These added together were bad enough, but there was something else too, on top of it all. It was a feeling in my stomach and my throat, a thought clawing at the back of my mind, that what Red had shown me was more real than the reality I saw, and that there were things more real than even that, and that it was all terrible. I would look at a shadow, and it would seem to hold more substance than whatever was casting it, and I sensed it contained depths that nobody understood or was capable of understanding. I spent the better part of Saturday in my room alone, trying to hold it together, but feeling always on the verge of cracking apart into jagged pieces of incoherence. I eventually passed out that evening. I awoke late in the morning on Sunday. I felt protected, as if nothing could hurt me. It was then I decided it would be a good idea to look through my diary again. It can't hurt you, I told myself. And now, I've been sitting on my bed for hours, trembling. Is this really happening? It feels as real as anything that's ever happened to me. But has that all been real? I don't know. All I know is that when I opened my diary, this is what was waiting for me on the last page. Monday, October 26th. Dear Kate, I don't think it matters what you do. Red will find you. And when he finds you, I would suggest not trying to escape. Maybe you'll be luckier than I was, but if you're not, you're better off not fighting. He tells me that our suffering is in proportion to how much we struggle against it. He's going to take me now to the church, the same one that I tried to burn down last year. He thinks that's very funny. He says that flames dance everywhere, all the time, and that they define the limits of the world, and that once I see them, once I really see them, he's going to take me past the flames, he says, and show me something more beautiful than I can comprehend. He says that there's nothing to be afraid of, but I'm afraid. I'm really, really afraid. I am too, Kate. Jesus Christ, I am too. Story 3. It started as a joke. My wife and I host a lot of parties, and if you've ever done clean-up after a party, you know that people leave things behind. Hats and coats constantly, scarves, purses, whatever. One time I found a pair of prescription glasses stuck in between the couch cushions. They were thick lenses too, like Velma thick. I don't know how the owner made it out of the front door without them, let alone how they drove home. A lot of the time, we'll get a call the next day or the next week, someone going, "Hey, so, I haven't seen my jacket lately. Did I leave it at your place?" But sometimes, no one ever claims it. And Jenny and I, Jenny's my wife, we aren't about to call everyone who was at the party to ask if they're missing whatever we found. So we just chuck it in a wooden chest we've got in the closet and leave it there until someone does come looking. So recently, we had a winter party and someone left their pants here. Now, it wasn't that kind of party, so I was pretty surprised to find a pair of pants laying around afterward. They were snow pants, the kind you wear over your other clothes to keep them warm and dry, and they were folded up and stored in a corner. I figured that probably someone had shown up in them to stay warm, and then taken them off once they got inside. Between the warmth of the house and the warmth of the alcohol, they must have forgotten to put them back on when they left at the end of the night. Jenny flipped through her pictures from the evening, but didn't have any shots of anyone wearing those pants, so into the trunk they went. As Jenny was tossing them in, she commented, "I bet we could clothe a whole person with what's in here." We laughed, but then I got to thinking that she was probably right. So later on, I dug through the trunk and sure enough, in addition to the pants, we had a button-down shirt, multiple jackets, several hats, a pair of gloves, a couple of scarves, and 2 pairs of shoes. While Jenny was out of the house that night, I put the shirt on a hanger, hung the jacket over it, clipped the gloves to the sleeves and pants to the bottom, and wrapped a scarf around it. Then I hung the whole thing up in the hallway, plopped a hat on top and put the shoes beneath it. The pants hung just to the ground, so at first glance, it really did look like someone lurking there, especially with the lights off. I heard the door slam when Jenny got home. She started to call out a greeting, but is abruptly cut off in a shriek. I came into the hallway, laughing, to find Jenny standing there with a hand to her chest, glaring at me. The clothes dummy swung quietly off to the side. "Real funny," she said. "You about gave me a heart attack." "I'm very sorry," I said, but I was laughing much too hard for her to believe me. "Yeah, you will be," she said, with mock seriousness, but she was laughing too, now that she was past the initial shock. Anyway, I thought it was all extremely funny, right up until I got up in the middle of the night to go to the toilet. I walked into the bathroom, turned on the lights, and shouted out loud, because Jenny had moved my clothes dummy into the bathroom and posed it sitting on the toilet. From the bedroom, I heard sleepy laughter. "Do you know what happens when you scare someone who's on his way to the bathroom?" I demanded. Rags are under the sink. Clean up whatever you need to, Jenny called back. A lesser man would have to clean up. I have iron self-control, I told her. Is that why you screamed loudly enough to wake me up? She teased. I didn't dignify that with a response. Also, I didn't have one. So this became a thing. Jenny and I would move the dummy around, and after a while, it wasn't even to scare each other anymore. We named him Albert, and he was just a feature of the house after a few weeks. We'd put him in the kitchen, the dining room, wherever. I came home a couple of days ago to find the clothes slumped in my chair in front of the TV, with one of my beers in his glove. I just got another beer and took a seat on the couch. Jenny came in later and said, "You're not going to move him?" "He was here first," I shrugged. "You're ridiculous," Jenny told me, and took Albert's beer. "He's not going to like that," I said. Jenny laughed. "What's he going to do about it?" That was a couple of days ago, like I said. Yesterday, I came home to find Albert hanging by the picture window at the back of the house. His clothes were splashed with something red, and there was a dripping knife wedged in one of his gloves. It was a pretty gruesome sight, and I applauded Jenny's ingenuity. "Did he get you, honey?" I called. No response, obviously. She wasn't about to give up the joke that easily. "Hey, the stuff's dripping onto the floor," I said loudly enough for her to hear me, wherever she was hiding. "I think it's staining the carpet." Still nothing. So I got a paper towel and wiped up the pretend blood, and then took Albert's knife away from him. Whatever Jenny had used really did look like blood, and I was starting to get uncomfortable. "Honey? Okay, you got me. Joke's over." Still no response, so I went looking. I went through the entire house and couldn't find her anywhere. Her car was out front, but Jenny was just missing. I called her phone, but it rang through to voicemail. When she still hadn't shown up by midnight, I was starting to get panicked. I'd called a few friends, but no one had heard from her. I decided to get a few hours of sleep and then figure out what to do in the morning. I laid down, turned out the lights, and was falling asleep when I heard a slight noise in the doorway. I opened my eyes to see Jenny in the doorway. "Where have you been?" I started, turning on the lights, but my voice died in my throat. It wasn't Jenny. It was Albert, hanging from the doorway of my room, swaying slightly back and forth above his shoes. The knife was back in his hand. My heart was hammering. This was obviously just Jenny taking a joke too far. But when I called out for her again and she didn't answer, my fear spiked. I took those clothes down, carried them downstairs, and even though I knew it was totally illogical, I burned them in the fireplace. I expected Jenny to come out to laugh at me once I got the fire going, or at least to chide me for stinking up the house. I don't know what they pack snow pants with, but it smells terrible when you burn it. But the fire burned down to ashes, and I was still alone. I slept for a bit, and when I left for work this morning, there was still no sign of Jenny, and she still wasn't answering her phone. I called the police to report her missing, and they're supposed to be sending someone over to take a look around and interview me, I guess. I hope they get here soon, because I just heard a noise from upstairs, and when I went up to look, the door to our walk-in closet was standing open. Hanging from the bars, aligned in 2 neat rows, were a dozen of Jenny's outfits. Shirts on the hangers, pants clipped below, shoes lined up underneath. The bedroom door only locked from the inside, but I closed it and used my tie to tie the knob to the banister in the hallway. I was going to leave the house, but there's a coat rack by the door. and I really don't think I lined my shoes up underneath it like that when I got home. I hope the police get here soon.